Welcome to How to Ruin Your Own Reputation, the show where we tackle subjects that can carry some shame or stigma or criticism. Today, we are talking about two very specific kinds of addiction, sex and love. Personally, I can more easily wrap my head around the sex addiction. I have a lot of questions about it, but I find it easier to understand, whereas love addiction, I think, for me, seems more complicated, but I would guess even more common than people would assume. I mean, love is great. Everyone loves love. Sex is great too. But when does pleasure become a problem? Well, that's when you bring in an expert. Gary McFarlane is founder of the Kairos Center. He helps individuals who are struggling with sex, love, porn addiction, anything really relationship-based and more. He deals with singles, couples, group sessions, and does a lot online. So he's accessible to everyone, everywhere, anytime. So let's just dive right in. And I want to welcome Gary McFarlane to the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Marcy. Yeah, I agree. Let's just get up close, Vsee, and let's just have
let's get in there.
Yeah.
So as I said, I do have a lot of questions, but I want to start with something really basic. How would you define the difference between sex addiction and love addiction?
The difference is very much the love addiction is all about trying to get attention and getting a sense of feeling wanted, even if it's paid for. It has its roots. It pretty much always has its roots, Marcy, back in childhood development, and something that isn't done well enough, and it's called attachment issues. And every time I touch attachment, it's hard to touch that word without unwrapping it a bit, because attachment isn't what's properly on the label on the can. In fact, I often say, why do you call it attachment? It should be detachment. It's rejection. It's loss. It's something that this clever man called John Bowlby back in the 1940s identified, which is in the early years of a child's development, the child needs a bonding with at least one significant other. And typically it's going to be a mother, but it also needs to be a father. And it's something that disrupts that bonding, whether it's postnatal depression, it's incubator upon birth, it's a mother that really just didn't particularly want the child, absentee because of maybe even drugs, maybe prison, but something means the child doesn't have what I call the lighthouse, the reference point for growing up and developing, and it's just not done good enough. It's not a criticism so much of a parent, it's that the bonding isn't done well enough. You can understand adoption, fostering, you can understand being sent to boarding school, those things that create a separation, and it creates this deficit, this I call it a black hole, to be honest, where the bonding isn't done early enough, soon enough, well enough, good enough. So later in life, it goes on to impact how the now developing child into the adult does their adult relationships. So what has this got to do with childhood? It's got everything to do with childhood as to how the adult now goes on. So the adult is now trying to fix the deficit of getting a sense of being wanted, but I call it a push me, pull you. I want somebody close to me that really owns me and loves me. But when you get too close and I'm fearful that you're not going to hold me long enough and you're going to reject me and let me go, then I push you away. So an argument, a conflict. And so they're constant searching out relationships, maybe dating sites and the likes, to fill that void that got set up back there with somebody who's giving me attention and feeling wanted. So that's really what we call love addiction. You're not sitting in a room just viewing porn and the next page and etc. You need interaction with other people. Even if you're paying for that service, the fact that they're giving you attention fills a void. Does that make some sort of sense?
Oh, absolutely. So because you didn't get it for whatever reason when you were a child, you're just searching for that constantly. as an adult.
And you never fill the void. Even if
Ooh,
partner, a spouse, I love you, you're just the best thing since sliced bread. I love you, you're so, that lasts 5 minutes and then you have to go off and try and get it elsewhere. And it's like a watering can with holes in the bottom, just leaking all the time. And so you've got to keep topping it up with more and more and more, but it never stays filled for more than 5 minutes before it's,
wow. Okay, that's really interesting. So it's almost as if you're sort of addicted to that rush, that first part, that part where you feel like you're each other's world, and all you do is just have eyes for each other. And then as soon as that kind of starts to fade a little bit, they need to move on and get that.
I wish it were that, Marcy, because then I could understand the dopamine hit and oh, don't we love to feel in love? Those early days. Oh, it's so nice. Not really. It's actually the attention that
Okay.
when I contact you and you say yes and we set up the appointment and I'm on my way, the heart is pumping, the dopamine is going. And when you turn up, the sex is a wet squid. I often say it's an anticlimax. It's what was all that about? It's the chase, it's the anticipation, which is the best part. That's where you're getting your dopamine serotonin fix. But it's all about the interaction with the person, more so than actually even the dopamine rush. The fact that you give me attention, you want my time, you want me, even if I'm paying for it, gives me a sense of being wanted. But it's
But
a
you're saying that
false.
even if you're in a relationship, even if somebody is giving you as much of their
Oh,
attention as they can, it's still not enough. Okay, so that's different than somebody who somebody who's desperate to find love, because same thing, sometimes they feel like they never got enough of it. And so, because I know people who go from relationship to relationship because they want so desperately to be in a relationship because they're so afraid of being alone that they will try everything they can to make a relationship work, even if they know it's unhealthy, even if they're not happy. They're so desperate to make that other person happy so
yeah.
that they don't leave, that they will do everything they can. And then if that person does leave, then they just move on to the next person. But that
It's
sounds
not.
different.
It's not to make the other person happy. It's all about me. Totally about me. That there is a need to feel connected and wanted and held. But there's such a leakage. That
Mm,
one spouse telling you how gorgeous, how good, how it's just not enough, because there's a black hole that you just put as much in there and it keeps on just depleting. So it's, in fact, we're misleading ourselves by even using the term love, because it's not really that you're seeking love or sex. For women, it most definitely isn't really the sex. It is
mm,
the connection, it's the sense of being wanted, it's the sense that somebody's giving me attention. And you need to understand, even the class clown, to get the false attention, the laughs, is better than no attention, even if it's
mm.
the wrong attention. And so, even when the relationship has run its course, you stay in it because it's better to have somebody than nobody. That's how the brain is working.
Right.
Yeah. And the minute you get wind that it might finish, you may even you'll perhaps torpedo it yourself. You'll do things to push the person away, because here's the logic with attachment issues. You've got to stay in control of relationships, and don't
Mm-hmm.
ever let anybody drop you, let you go, because the brain is still remembering something that happened back there in childhood. So you must never let that happen. So it is better for you to throw a hand grenade in and do things to push the person away. They may never have left, but you're doing
Mm.
things to push them away because you fear they're gonna get there first. And so you blow it up, because it's better to be in control of the pain that's going to come than if somebody does it to you. That's the logic of the brain.
Oh, I understand that. It's funny because I was thinking earlier that I could see people having two very different reactions to the same situation. What I was thinking is, if you have somebody who has, let's say, abandonment in their childhood or in their history, I was thinking before we started speaking that they can either react to it by doing what we're talking about, which is searching and searching and searching and sort of latching on to somebody in a situation and just hoping that it works because they don't want to be alone. Or it can go the other way, which even subconsciously, they don't really attach to somebody, even if they feel like they are attaching. But there's a part of them, and I'll tell you, I've been accused of this. There's a part of them that just won't attach because in their mind, it's got an expiry date. Like it's gonna end. I don't know when, but it's gonna end. So I'm not gonna get too attached.
Absolutely.
It's gonna
I
end.
can't
So
add anything to what you just said. That's absolutely right. There are those two opposing poles and the dichotomy. So some will not do relationships, will not do dating. It's just the brain, it's too dangerous. They're going to finish with you at some point. I told you, remember what happened back in childhood? No, I don't remember, because the brain doesn't remember all that stuff back there. But that's not true. You don't remember it. Here's the little, let me show you the little you. You know, that's the little Marcy.
holding up a little me.
Even though you don't remember it, hey, guess what? The brain is carrying it in the filing cabinet up here under K, and it remembers the precision of it, but you can't access it because what the brain does is to blot it out, because you'll have a nervous breakdown if you carry the stressful, difficult stuff. So it blots it out. People have different coping strategies. Dissociation, that's a coping strategy for managing.
Right.
And so, yeah, you're trying to avoid being hurt again. That's what it's about. So there are two different things. You either don't do dating and don't do relationships because it's too dangerous, yet you desperately want somebody for yourself, because we're human beings. We were made to be in relationships. If we doubt it, look what COVID lockdown did.
Right, but there's different kinds of relationships.
Oh,
right?
very
Not
so.
different.
Oh,
yeah, because I don't know that long-term monogamous relationships are for everybody, but I do think connection is good, and I do think people
close partnerships. I talk about being able to interact with other human beings.
Right. I do think people underestimate how much our past effects are present, because I think people are always saying the cliches of like, don't look behind you because you're not going that way. Look forward. It's like, well, you kind of have to look behind sometimes because it is part of who we are. Our past are part of who we are.
Something has shaped who you are today, and you can't entirely. I mean, what you just said reminded me of the fact that it's sort of right. When we're driving a car, the rear view mirror is way smaller than the windscreen. Yeah. And you've got to spend much more time looking in the windscreen going forward. Otherwise, you're going to crash if you're doing your driving through the rear view. So you've got to have some on the shadow, as I call it, but you go forward with your future.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. Now, when we talk about, we'll go back and forth, but when we talk about sex addiction, what I always found really interesting is that it seems like whenever there's a celebrity in the news, whether it's an actor or a politician, and it seems like whenever they get caught cheating, all of a sudden they're off to rehab for sex addiction. And I'm like, is it sex addiction or is it just bad behavior? So how common is it?
It's very, very common. But the media stuff over in this country, it's more likely the professional footballer caught once again cheating. I say, look, that might not be sex addiction at all. Shall I give you the definition that I use?
Sure.
Let me just read it. So, a pattern of sexual behaviors which preoccupy your thoughts and are out of control. You cannot stay stopped for a sustainable period or consistently, and the behaviors have harmful consequences, and the behaviors serve a function in your life, and the behaviors are used primarily to anesthetize some negative feeling state. And what's really important here, the most important part of that criterion, which makes it an addiction rather than a love of sex, is that it serves a function. So if an individual is in a situation where they just can't access sex, whatever it may be, they may not have any major repercussions from it, bodily or otherwise, because actually they're not addicted. It's not serving a function. It's just they do love sex, but it's not an addiction. An addiction means you're going to have a cold turkey effect if you don't give it what it wants, which is its dopamine fix, because it got used to the physiology of the body over time, has actually become use dependent on the dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, norepinephrine mix, and it needs it. So even if you try and do the I'm not doing this anymore, the white knuckle thing, hold on to the chair and I'm not doing this, you'll get so far. But the brain's going to say, give us our fix now. We need our fix now. Give us our fix. No, I'm not doing this anymore. Do you know the problems I caused to my partner? It's just, I'm not doing this. And it's midnight. I can't sleep. Give us our fix. Well, right, I'll just do it again just so I can get to sleep. I've got a busy day tomorrow. So, and then you're back on the loop.
Wow.
Constantly going around. It's all
Yeah.
about
So,
physiology that got changed.
well, it sounds exactly the opposite of pleasure, because what you said originally was that there's a difference between, right? A love of sex is a love of sex and you're enjoying it. What you're describing doesn't sound very pleasurable at
No,
all.
the
It's
pleasure,
numbing, right? Didn't you say it was, it's
it's
numbing certain
anesthetizing
feelings,
and numbing.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the pleasure is from the chase. It's not the sex, it's not the orgasm, it's the chase. In other words, it's the anticipation of what's to come, whether it's the sexting, the phone call to set up the appointment, on the porn, the mouse clicking on the page. It's the anticipation. That's where this is so good. That's where you're pumping the dopamine, oxytocin. But the actual sex itself, most of the time for so many people, the actual sex is I call it a wet squid. I do mean it as a pun. It's an anticlimax.
Right.
And you get, and it's, what was that about? All of that. No, because you actually had your fix back
Before
there,
that even happened.
long before
Interesting.
that. Yeah.
So is it similar to drugs, where you're going to need a sort of a heightened experience to even get that satisfaction? You're going to need to maybe increase the risks around it, or something that you're going to need
over
more and more?
time. Yeah, absolutely. Over time, you're going to likely need to do something more. And it's all about whereas this drugs, you may go for the harder and more, etc. With porn, it's the novelty factor, or the increased risks, or the crossing boundaries, which is keeps the brain interested to keep this pumping. So constantly there's something that's increasing over time. I'm not saying quick, it could be years for some people, but when they look back, they will say, my goodness, I never imagined I would be over here and doing this. Up to, because of course I'm working with those that we call it the early morning knock at the door from the law enforcement, which because they never would have imagined they would be in this place 5 years on, because the nature of porn is it's not going to stay static in the same usage. You're going to take more risks and boundaries. I mean, why is it that the highest download of porn is between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m.? It's madness. Where are most people between 9 a.m. and 5? But the employment contract says if you are found downloading porn it's gross misconduct, it's instant dismissal. That means potentially loss of income, loss of mortgage. Why would you take that sort of risk? And yet they do.
Well, it's right. Somebody who isn't struggling with that would find that so completely difficult to understand. But you're right. That is what makes it similar to other addictions, in that will come first before anything else. And I will say, and it's a weird thing to compare it to, but I battled a severe eating disorder for years. And I can tell you that there were times when I put my life at risk. I mean, I put my life at risk with awful behavior, walking to my gym at 2:00 in the morning on a Sunday by myself. But the fear of dying was not as strong as my fear of gaining weight, which is completely irrational. Taking pills that could kill me. I was afraid of dying. I had children, but the fear of what the addiction and the disorder was for me, that trumped everything else. And that's the difference between doing something because it feels good and you enjoy it, and you'll risk everything to get it.
Marcy, I think what would really be helpful is just cross off the word in front of addiction, whether it's porn, drugs, just cross off the word in front of it and just be left with addiction. So when you made the comparison of eating, mine was in whether it's less or worse. No, don't distinguish, just cross off the word, because they're all about self-soothing and managing emotions all the time. It's escape. And why wouldn't we want to escape for a while from the stuff of life and responsibilities? But the reality is we've got to find other more appropriate coping strategies for managing emotions. And because it gets set up too early in life, it means you never learn more appropriate coping strategies later on. It's not you who chooses the addiction. It's your brain that chooses the one that's right for you. And we don't know why, for one, it's drugs, for another, it's alcohol, for another, it's porn. We don't know. It's not you who choose. It's your brain that says, wow, to the one that's right for you. Remember, they never come singly. There's always going to be a co-addiction. In other words, because it's not about porn, it's not really about the sex. It means if you go into a program and you start to reduce, what you may not realize is alcohol increases, or gaming increases, or gambling increases. But yeah, your recovery program's working really well because it was never about the sex or the alcohol, or it was always about a coping strategy for managing emotions and self-soothing. Yeah.
It's really interesting because I mean, I'm very honest with my story, but I will tell you that there was a time when I was at the peak of, well, I had several peaks with my eating disorder, but I was also dealing with trauma through promiscuity. And I could tell you that I always say I really connect the food and the sex, because it was still, I still felt that I was using both as ways of abusing my body. It was both were ways of that I was hurting myself, my body. But I often, and it's so crazy to think about, but there were times when I knew if I stopped, if I pulled back from, let's say, letting myself be sexualized, then I would go back into eating, because one thing that kept me from eating was knowing that people were going to see me naked. But if I stopped that part of it, then I would go to the food. So it was, they really did work kind of hand in hand.
Made logical sense. Absolutely. Made logical sense.
To you, it makes sense.
Yeah.
To other people, it's a little bit crazy. But the brain is it's so interesting. And that's why really we really shouldn't judge what people are going through, because we're all dealing, most of us have dealt with trauma in our past.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, it's very difficult to be able to pinpoint exactly what it is that makes us think the way we think and feel the way we feel and act the way we act. So it must be, is it difficult for people, do you find, to reach out and get help? Or I'll start with sex addiction first, because I do think that there's a bit of a stigma attached to it.
There is. Because there's something about mental health is a sign of weakness if you get help. So we've got the princes, Prince Harry and Prince William, trying to, and because of their mother, they went to therapy. That means it's okay to go to therapy. And the Hollywood stars are having, that means, so thank you, Hollywood stars, and thank you, princes, because you're sort of helping some people to get the help they need. But yeah, absolutely, it is. It does have a big stigma. But most of the time, folks think that they've got this under control and don't really need the help. And they push the boundaries and push the boundaries. And often is when they're on the floor just crawling, and not even crawling, just in a real bad place, and probably being caught, or the law that forces their hand to get the help. Regrettably, that's what some catastrophe is what forces the hand of so many people before they'll actually get the help. And yet, such a shame about the stigma, because it is all about self-soothing and managing something back there, whether it's some trauma. But let's not look at trauma as what's happening in Afghanistan. I often say, look, trauma is the 6-year-old whose Action Man was stolen by the boy down the road. And when he went to get it back, a dad slammed the door in his face and said, it's not yours. And his dad didn't go and rescue. And why 40 years later is this 6-year-old, now 40, telling me about it? Because it was trauma to the 6-year-old. We can laugh at it now, but it was trauma, and he'd been carrying that. So we've got to go after the stuff that happens back there in childhood, because those are the reasons why people are self-soothing and managing their emotions. Don't just put them on a recovery program. That's the step 5 to 10 stuff. You've got to look at the step 1 to 5. What caused? How did you get to be this way? In other words, and I've got a history taking questionnaire to build a profile of each client from the minute they were born up to the age that they are. What happened to you back there? And 188 questions over 3 sessions, 2-minute sessions, to build that profile. It's the equivalent of, Marcy, if you've got some pathology going on in your body, you've got pain in your leg, you'll go to your doctor, referred to the hospital, x-rays, blood scans, tests, they call you back X weeks later. This is what we've found, Marcy. This is the diagnosis. We're not medically qualified. We're psychologically qualified. That means our blood tests and scans is the equivalent of the answers to those questions. We can identify something about what happened back there that looks so innocent, but actually was really quite a big deal. Bullying, a parent shouting across the table and causing embarrassment, divorce and separation, the middle child syndrome, just not seeing, etc. There's all sorts of reasons. But what you mustn't do is compare little Johnny to twin Johnny, because the brain and their personality are different, and what might have affected one brain may have not impacted that other. So don't look at one as weaker or lesser than.
Oh, I think that's so important. I mean, I think of 2 things when you say that. One is what you were saying just a few minutes ago about when people minimize their trauma. When people will say, "Oh, this shouldn't be such a big deal because so and so is going through so much more," and that's just we do that to ourselves all the time, when we have to honor what we're going through and give it the attention that it needs, because we can't minimize it. That's doing ourselves and the people around us such a huge disservice. But also, to what you just said, you could have 2 people who have been through the exact same experience. And I'll use myself again, for example. It's that you take my sister and I, who are very, very different people, who, her being 7 years older than me, we both lost our brother young, which affected us hugely. And then we both lost our mother a few years later.
That's trauma.
And huge trauma. However, we're so different that the way to talk to me about it would have been very different with how to talk to her. Even the way that we talk to each other, it took us years to be able to understand each other because of the age difference and where we were, just the sibling order. And so even if you know somebody who's going through something, maybe something that you went through and it was really not a big deal for you, but they seem to be struggling, there's a lot of other factors that we really we can't underestimate what somebody's feeling, because also we don't know this. You may have a lot more support around you than that person does, or just coping skills that person doesn't have. And so we don't want to diminish our own pain, but also diminish somebody else's pain. And I think that we don't even know, like I said to you, I know where my eating disorder started. I know where my trauma started was when I was 17 and my brother passed away. I've said, anyone who knows me for 5 minutes knows my life has never been the same since that moment. And then losing my mother when I was pregnant 10 years later. And you describe a parent as a lighthouse. And it's funny you said that, because I always say my mother was my home. She was my safe place to come home to. And I was, so I always say my brother was the invisible armor I wore out in the world to protect me. And my mother was my safe place to come home to. So by 28, I had lost my armor and my home. And it absolutely impacted me. But I think even me knowing that, it's, I tell you, it's obvious. But I think still it's taken me 50 something years to still kind of understand the impact.
Well, it really is never a criticism of parents. That's never what we're doing. Before you we criticize parents for not being a good enough light out or whatever it is. Always look at the parents that parented them. Like in the relay race, really, I see a metaphorical baton. There's a script, there's a family script, and don't look at parents, look at great-great-grandparents. And I often see, look, there's a script that gets passed on down, and ultimately what we become is, look, I'm going to be the dam this has got to stop. This is not going to go past me, because we know it gets passed on to the next generation.
Mhm.
And the best gift you can give to the next generation, the children, is not to pass on some of the stuff to them. But you're not just working on your own stuff. What you must remember, in my view, is it's all the generations from back here you say it stops with.
So when it comes to love addiction, let's
Mm,
say, I was saying at the beginning in my intro, I feel like I know a lot of people who seem, I would think, from a layman's perspective, that they seem to be addicted to, again, just needing to be with somebody, that
yeah,
they feel like they are not complete if they
yeah,
aren't with
we
somebody.
want
If they don't
something.
have somebody who is making them feel, like you said, wanted and validated,
Yeah,
that I would think that there are people who would even revolve their choices in life, even as far as maybe finding a career where they think it would be easier to meet people that they might
it's
marry, or their hobbies. Everything they do in life
and
revolves
further than
around,
that, absolutely, and even
really.
more than that, absolutely, because I've got to. And the
So how
answer,
do you, well, let me, sorry, just because I'm
yeah,
thinking,
go on, go on,
I
go
tell
on.
you, it's, so what's the difference between, this is what I'm saying, with sex addiction, it almost seems like you can, it's easier to sort of almost visualize, but with love addiction or something like this, it seems like it would be very easy to confuse it with, oh, just a romantic. I'm just a hopeless romantic, which makes it seem really pretty.
Yeah,
But there's got to be that, like I
yeah.
said, that difference between when does pleasure become a problem.
Yeah, there's a deficit. There's likely to be a deficit. We won't put everybody in that box, but where you
Mhm.
see that what has become really quite compulsive, I need to have, my antenna will go up and I'll be thinking, there's a deficit. And that for me immediately really starts to question, there's an attachment void. Something happened back there. And it's not always obvious, Marcy. I often give the example of the minister who the congregation and is there for the congregation, tries to give as much time to little Johnny playing cars on the carpet and football. But as soon as the phone rings, little Johnny hears the phone ring and, sorry, son, I've got to go. Somebody needs me in the parish and such. And yeah, that's okay, Dad, I understand that. So a perfect, beautiful family upbringing. But, X years later, this little boy has got attachment issues. And look and say, but how? Why? Perfect family, beautiful family. He gave allowance for it was dad's job necessary to go.
Mm,
But actually, it said, you are not as important as
jeez.
no matter
Oh,
how he logically put it, he knew. And so X years later, there's all sorts of stuff that comes. So I went to the Action Man, for example. And why is it? What's using my toothbrush and not putting it back got to do with an Action Man when you were 6? It's got everything to do with it. Now I become possessive of my stuff,
oh my gosh. Oh my God. That's a
and that
lot.
toothbrush that you kept borrowing and you didn't put it back. I don't mind you taking it, but put it back. Put it back. Why are you getting so angry and so upset? I don't know.
But
That's
Gary, the longer we live, the longer, the more of these experiences that we have. I mean, it also seems kind of like, oh, that little boy with the father, like he seemed like he did the right thing. He couldn't not help his
absolutely.
parishioner. So there was nothing wrong. So then how do we what do we do? How do you keep that from happening? Or once you know it, how do you,
You almost
and,
can't, Marcy, because you don't know how that little boy's brain's going to receive
right,
that, because his twin brother didn't.
right.
So it's not a criticism of a dad. He
No,
did
but
the
what do you
best.
do? What do we do? Life and life, what do we,
I've got the
you
answer
can't
to that one,
win.
Marcy. Because you try to do the best that you can do as a parent. Who can
But
be
even after
critical?
that, forget the parent part, because yeah, he did the right thing. But so then 20 years later, little Johnny's in a relationship and something is happening there, and nothing's happened, but there's these old feelings are coming through.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? How does he deal with that? How does this partner deal with that? to me, it seems like there's so much stuff in our brains and in our past and in our
Yeah,
bones. Like, how do we have relationships with other
that's
people with
so
all of this
tough,
going on?
Marcy. That's so tough because how's that man now in relation gonna put it back to when he was young and the dad, the
Right.
full. I mean, he's not. It's just, and it's when I guess you come into therapy and you do a sort of a
Uh,
history in, but sometimes we'll never find it.
I think if you're in a relationship and something isn't right, that there are times when, if you really take a step back, that there is an issue with the other person. It's either you don't click together or they're just not healthy for you. And then there are times when you might go, I don't understand. They seem great. They're not doing anything wrong, but why am I reacting this way? I think there are times when we can know ourselves enough to go, why am I reacting that way? And I guess it's in those moments that you got to go, maybe I should talk to someone about that. And taking it back to what we said earlier, which is that it doesn't have to be something huge. You don't want to wait for that early morning knock at the door from the police before you go get help. It could be, why am I finding myself in a string of relationships and they're always ending the same way? And it's something that I'm always, either I'm searching for the same type of people for some reason, or I'm turning every situation into the same situation, but
There's a
not to
pattern.
minimize it by saying it's just a little thing, when it could really be impacting our lives in much bigger ways than we even realize.
Absolutely. There's a pattern that you now start to see. And at some point, you perhaps need to lift your head up and say, something isn't quite right, is it?
Yeah, I've often said before that I think there's this old kind of cliche that you have to love yourself and you have to be sort of have all your stuff together before you get into a relationship. And I don't think that's true. I think as long as you know what you're bringing and you're not giving the other person the job or responsibility of fixing you. I think if you go into it knowing these are my issues and I'm aware of them and I'm doing what I can do to work through them, that's fair. I think it's when people take their issues into the relationship and expect the other person to fix them, to be responsible for them. That's because, look, every relationship you go into, you've got your stuff, they've got their stuff, and then you'll have your stuff together. That's a lot of stuff. So
It's a lot of
you got to be prepared to kind of work on your
You're very
stuff.
kind.
And then
You're very kind in the way we go into
am I?
relationships because we fall in love. To know that I've got my stuff. Well, it's not me. I'm not the problem. You're the problem. But most of the time, the other person becomes the mirror that reflects our stuff back at us. You know, somebody has said, marriage is the place of our partnership, longer term
Right.
partnership, is the place of our healing. Don't leave it too quickly. Why? Because the other person is going to start to bring out our stuff.
Mm.
They are going to bring out our stuff. And if you leave it too quickly, you're still going to have to work it through with somebody else. So I just say, look, work it through with this one and then make a decision you're going to leave or stay. But work it through, because you're just going to keep moving with your stuff. And it's going to look different with this other person, but the stuff's going to come out.
It's tough. Relationships are tough with
Well,
other people and with
that's an
ourselves, right?
understatement.
It's a lot.
Relationships just, oh my goodness,
It is,
just
but everything, it's all so tough. I mean, and
hard
between
work.
addiction and compulsion, and it's yeah, but you have to decide, is it worth it? I think sometimes it will be, sometimes it won't be in relationships. But I think the underlying thing here really is, when we were talking about love and sex addiction, porn addiction, and all of that too, is that it does stem from somewhere, and you can't just bandage it, because if you've got a tire and you keep getting a hole in the tire, but you keep bandaging up, but you keep going the same streets, it's going to keep, like, you have to figure out, where is that nail coming from that I keep driving over. But again, I don't care what the addiction is. I don't care what the disorder is. We are all deserving of getting the help from it. And the last thing we want to do is feel shame. I mean, I think shame really keeps us from getting the help we need. And we are doing ourselves such a disservice by not living
Shame is
with
so
health and happiness and the joy and the freedom that we deserve.
Shame plus narcissism equals sex addiction.
Ooh.
Shame is a massive component of addictions. Shame means hiddenness. Go into hiding. Don't ever share this with anybody else. Don't go to 12 steps. Don't let anybody know. Don't talk about it. Just stay hidden. And partners get caught under the umbrella of the shame of learning about the addiction, and society will, yeah. So shame is a massive component that keeps it hidden. And then this other one of narcissism, well, that's not me. I don't want the limelight. I don't actually, and I have to do some work to help some clients to recognize the narcissistic traits. Now, I'm not saying you're a narcissist, please. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is you've got traits that come out of narcissism, me, myself, and I, even though I think I'm doing for you, actually all roads lead back to give me something. So there's an ulterior conditional, and and that's narcissistic. And I often say the antidote to narcissism is empathy. The two cannot coexist together in the same place. They're like opposite ends of the same poles of a magnet, north, south. You try and put them together, they repel, they push. Narcissism, empathy. So if you want to do something about narcissistic traits, you got to work on increasing your empathy.
I said at the beginning that you do a lot of your work online, so people can.
So yes, I work online with people all over the world. Just yesterday I was in Saudi Arabia. I could be in Beijing. I could be wherever you've got internet connection, working with people with mostly porn, sex addiction, but relationships, couples counseling, singles, very much so. And the EMDR work that I do, again, it's all done online, and all the eye movements, all the webcams for eye movements without my hands and fingers getting RSI. Don't do that. There's all the gadgets it's really good, and it all works.
And you said that you were going to make a generous offer to listeners from our podcast.
Yeah. I'll certainly give you a reduction. Just come and have an assessment, and I'll give you an insight of whether there is something about sex, porn, love addiction. And then you can decide if you want to go on to do the more extensive history taking. But remember, when we do the history taking, it's not about porn or sex or whatever. It's about what happened back there that set you up on a trajectory. Yeah. And it so happens we might go on to work with porn and sex and such, but this isn't about sex and porn. It just isn't, So get back your reputation. It got ruined, but let's get your reputation back. You can get your reputation back.
Although I prefer to, I heard a quote once that said, once you ruin your reputation, you're free to do anything you want, because to me, there was a huge freedom and liberation that came from ruining my own reputation. It's just living in truth and without fear and without shame. That's how
I like. No, what if it's that? Oh yeah, I'll take that. Oh, I'll take that.
It's risking ruining your reputation by being honest about who you are, facing your life and living without shame and fear.
Oh, I like that.
That's what that's all about. I won't keep you any longer, but we're going to put all your information in the show notes, how everybody can reach you. Very interesting topic. We could go on forever. We'll have to have you back. But thank you for spending this time with us and sharing your insights. And I hope everybody goes and visits your sites and gets to chat with you a bit and find out something a little bit more about themselves, because there's always so much to learn that we don't even realize. So thank you so much for your time.
So this is all about helping people to be able to become the best that they can be without shame, and adding color back into life. That's what the Kairos Center is about. And it's not about judging people's sexuality and their choices and whatever. It isn't. It's just about helping us all to be the best that we can be.
I love that. Less shame, more color.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And thanks everyone for listening. And don't forget to like and subscribe and share. And we will see you next week. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Marcy. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.